Thank you, everyone, for joining me on my talk on carbon pricing. I'm Dedeyne. I'm Innovation Officer. Perhaps not a well-known position. It's quite new at Ghent, mainly to facilitate proposal development, to have higher quality proposals for and attract government funding, especially for research projects that have a high potential for valorization and market uptake. My focus is circular carbon, which is sketched on the figure on the right a bit. In capture terms, this is the CO2 pipeline and the plastics pipeline that I'm mostly involved with. And in that position as innovation officer, I'll also do some proactive work, looking into existing legislation or upcoming legislation, industrial developments, and so on. Which actually gave rise to me writing a report on carbon pricing. I can also share this with the people that are interested in this, and that report is the basis for this short presentation. So, carbon pricing. What is it and why do we need it? Basically, right now, if you produce something, fuel, material that benefits society for 10 euros, but you create some emissions, which can imply some harm on society, being shorter life expectancy, health impacts, the floodings we saw this summer in Belgium, for example. Those all have a cost, but as of now, these emissions are not a cost for a company, so their net profit remains 10 euros. If we want to transition to something more sustainable with the same process, we need to tax this cost and reduce the profit of the companies. This is not an idea I proposed. This is something that was proposed by this guy in 2015. I think he knows a bit more about carbon taxing and sustainability than I do. But even he said to his stakeholders, "How about a carbon tax? We really need it." That's the business side in the US, but legislation in the EU is on the same level. This is Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who said on the Glasgow conference on climate, we need to put a price on carbon because right now nature is paying for this harm. How can we do this? There are basically two ways: either a carbon tax, so legislators impose a price. Let's say you pay 30 euros per ton of CO2 that you emit. And then the market can determine, each company on itself, based on their business plan, how much CO2 reductions is worth this. Can we achieve to offset this carbon tax? On the other hand, you have emission trading systems where regulators impose the amount of CO2 that can be emitted by companies by putting on the market allowances. So if you emit 1 ton of CO2, you have to return 1 allowance. And these allowances can be traded on the market. So the price of these allowances as well is determined by the market. Both systems have their advantages and disadvantages. For carbon tax, it's quite easy to implement, but you don't regulate the emission reduction. And on top of that, there's no viable technological substitute. It just means you tax a product more and you won't achieve any emission reduction. ETS, on the other hand, directly impacts the amount of CO2 emissions, so it has a greater certainty on that one. But there, the key is that legislators need to have strict rules, and it depends on strong government management. ETS is actually applied in the EU. It's one of the oldest systems of carbon taxing in the world, and basically covers the entire European continent. It covers a range of emissions from a range of sectors, but here the impact of legislation already comes into play. Sectors such as agriculture or transport, which are big emitters, are not covered by ETS, nor the emission of, let's say, methane, which is also a strong greenhouse gas. So here you see the effect of a strong legislative aspect on the carbon reduction. Additionally, so I've talked about these allowances that need to be surrendered by industries that are emitting gas gases. the European Commission produces these allowances, but they decrease the amount of allowances each year. So making a pathway towards carbon neutrality. Does this have any effect? Well, here you can see a small overview of different sectors. The two indicated with an arrow, energy supply and industry, are covered by ETS, and you can see a clear reduction after 2005. The blue line here on the graph, which is when the ETS system was first implemented. This entire reduction is due to the ETS. That's of course another discussion, as there are a few issues with the current system in place within the European Union. For example, I discussed trading on open market, which is about half of the allowances, but the other half of the allowances that's created is actually given or granted to companies based on a benchmark that's made across the EU for production facilities, meaning that the best in class, so the cleanest production facility, does not have to pay any allowances. They get it for free from the European Commission, and more polluting companies have to pay their surplus on top of this. For example, if you produce hydrogen with steam methane reforming, for each ton of hydrogen you get 6.8 allowances, as the best in class production produces 6.8 tons of CO2 per ton of hydrogen. Now, another issue with this concept: if you produce hydrogen from electrolysis, well, best in class there is no carbon, so zero emissions, and also zero allowances given per ton of hydrogen that's created. So you can see that's clearly an issue, but it's not acknowledged, at least until 2026 within Europe. On top of this, there's also minimum daily production capacity you need to surpass before you actually step into the ETS system, which is about 25 tons of product per day. For an electrolyzer, this would mean 100 megawatts, which is, I think, there's no electrolyzer in the world that already reaches this. So quite some issues. European Commission tries to fix these, for example, with the Fit for 55 package, more stringent emission goals. And for these ETS system, they reduced the allowances one time, but they also accelerated the rate of reduction. And they're looking to include more sectors like shipping, but also residential heating, for example, can be included. Still up to discussion on the European level. Now, the thing why I'm discussing this right now is the price volatility we have seen lately. So in the early years, there was actually a very low price for ETS. Due to financial crisis and slow economic growth, there was a great surplus of allowances, making the price quite low. Up until 2018, when they announced Market Stability Reserve, which is sort of a saving account. All surplus allowances are stored there, and market cannot reach them. Only if there's some huge economic downturn and the Commission wants to support these carbon-intensive industries, they can release this back to the market. So higher price, short dip for COVID-19, but then we see this rapid increase in price when the European Commission discussed the Fit for 55 package and these more stringent emission reductions. As of now, it's very volatile as everything in the market due to the Ukraine crisis. Current price, last time I checked, was about 80 euros per ton. Now, why is this reached this price level? Here are the costs for carbon capture in some of the most polluting industries. You see the first line, the first vertical line is the price beginning of 2021. Then you can see the second line is the current price, and the maximum price we had halfway February, just before Ukraine happened, close to 100 euros per ton of CO2. And you can see that all these sectors are basically within that the capture cost is basically covered by the ETS cost. So this gives rise to industry looking forward to implementing these carbon capture technologies. Looking to the power sector, for example, for 1 megawatt hour for a coal plant, a lignite plant, and a natural gas plant. Blue is the cost of the plant itself. Yellow is cost of CO2 emissions priced at 40 euros per ton, or in light yellow, 80 euros per ton. Notice for coal plants here, which have a high emission, that energy prices per megawatt hour basically double by having this high cost of emission. I don't have to discuss how energy prices are evolving lately. and carbon taxing is a small part of it, of course. Now, if you compare this to carbon capture and storage, for these same kind of plants, we actually see that at a price of 80 euros, so the top of the bar graphs here, that carbon capture is actually competitive compared to just emitting this into the environment. And on top of that, just as a frame of reference, cost of capture typically is much larger than the cost for transport of the CO2 and eventual storage, which means CCU has to compete with CCS, that you need to have a very small cost of utilization, as the cost of transport and storage is also quite low. So I'm gonna end with a few takeaway messages. So carbon pricing is basically the polluter pays, which sounds good, but there's a lot of boundary conditions that need to be met to have an effective measurement against climate change. For example, ambitious climate goals from legislators to boost these ETS prices. The sectors that are covered by the system are reducing their emissions. And therefore they're looking to extend this to other sectors in the future, probably. And at current ETS prices, although they're very volatile, they start to get really interesting for industry to start looking into CCUS technologies.